It was in March 2007, and Kenya was deep in the heat of the election campaigns. Everywhere you turned, people were debating, arguing, and rallying behind their favorite candidates. The energy was electric. Then, out of nowhere, news broke. Someone had gifted Langata MP Raila Odinga a brand new Hummer H3, a whole Hummer. The streets went wild. Even Miguna, who was just a blogger back then, couldn't keep calm. It was a shocker. People were asking, who gave him the car? Was it a political move? And most importantly, how did Raila pull up in a Hummer while others were still doing campaign rounds in old Land Cruisers? Kenyans couldn't stop talking. The buzz was real. Not just the Kibaki campaign secretariat was in shock as they watched that sleek Hummer roll through the streets, effortlessly pulling the youth's votes towards Raila. No, my G, it wasn't just them. Millions of Kenyans were left speechless. A whole luxurious Humvee? And the craziest part, the mind behind this jaw-dropping gift wasn't some billionaire businessman or a top politician. No, it was a 26-year-old chap, Mr. Don Bosco Gichana. People couldn't believe it. Who was this guy? Where did he get the money? And why would a young man like him make such a bold move in the high-stakes political game? The whispers started. The speculations grew, and just like that, Don Bosco Gichana became a name everyone wanted to know more about. See, Don Bosco Gichana wasn't like the rest. While most of his peers were out here struggling to make ends meet, this guy seemed to have it all: money, power, and the guts to shake up the political scene. In fact, the only thing he shared with the ordinary youth was that nobody really knew who he was. He was simply a mystery, a shadow, a name that had suddenly appeared, sending shockwaves across the country. But one thing was clear: he was young and rich. And in a country where wealth at that age was rare, everyone wanted to know, who was Don Bosco Gichana? And where did his money come from? Don Bosco Gichana's life was the kind of story that could sell thousands of copies. One of those tales that felt almost unreal. Born in a humble home, the son of a Kisii teacher, his journey was nothing short of extraordinary. He wasn't born into wealth, nor did he inherit a fortune, but somehow he cracked the code. With nothing but a student visa in his pocket, he stepped into the land of opportunities, America. And just like that, he transformed from an ordinary young man into a self-made entrepreneur. People wondered, how did he do it? What was his secret? All they knew was he left Kenya as a student and came back as a man who could gift a presidential candidate a whole Hummer H3 without blinking. Being a teacher's kid, Don Bosco Gichana was naturally sharp. He wasn't just any student. He had the kind of brilliance that set him apart. And when he secured admission to St. Mary's Yala, a prestigious national high school, it was proof that he was destined for great things. But Don wasn't just book smart. He had the kind of mind that saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. His intelligence didn't go unnoticed, and soon his hard work paid off in a big way. He bagged a scholarship from the renowned school, an opportunity that will change the course of his life forever. Little did anyone know this was just the beginning of a story that would one day shake the nation. Don Bosco Gichana's journey took him to Brown University in the US, a place where young intellectuals from all over the world came to chase their dreams. At first, it was all about academics, meeting and mingling with fellow bright minds, debating ideas, and soaking in the prestige of an Ivy League education. But campus life wasn't just about books. Beyond the lecture halls, Don found himself in the company of a different kind of genius, street-smart hustlers who played a whole other game. These weren't just students, they were masters of deception, deep in the business of high-level scams. Their specialties, two major ones. First, the business email compromise (BEC) scam, a clever trick where top-dollar companies were manipulated into wiring money straight into the scammers' accounts, thinking they were making legitimate transactions. A scheme so bold it targeted the US National Treasury itself. It was a dangerous world, one filled with fast money, high risks, and the kind of wealth most people could only dream of. In this world of high-stakes fraud, Don Bosco and his crew had a system, a scheme so sleek it ran like a well-oiled machine. They targeted Americans who could never fight back, those who were either dead or locked up in prison, their weapon, identity theft. While stolen social security numbers in hand, they manipulated the system, filing fake tax returns and cashing in on fraudulent refunds straight from the US Department of Treasury. It was the perfect crime, clean, faceless, and incredibly lucrative. And as the money rolled in, Don's life changed. The boy from a humble Kisii home was now playing in the big leagues, moving in circles where wealth was measured in millions and risk was just part of the game. But in a world where easy money flows, so does trouble, and soon the walls will start closing in. By his early 20s, Don Bosco was no ordinary young man. The identity theft scheme had turned him into a millionaire almost overnight. While his peers were still figuring out life, Don was out there playing in a league of his own. One where money wasn't a problem, only how to spend it. And spending it, he did. With his pockets overflowing, Don started living out his wildest dreams. He bought homes, prime properties, and assets in multiple cities, making sure his wealth was not just seen but felt. But amongst all his flashy acquisitions, one stood out the most: the Capri 7 restaurant in Halinga, a high-end establishment that quickly became the ultimate status symbol. It wasn't just a business, it was a statement, a declaration that Don had arrived, young, rich, and untouchable, or so he thought. Because in the shadows, eyes were watching, and the higher he climbed, the harder fall that awaited him. One hot afternoon, as Don Bosco Gichana sat back, sipping a cold juice, a bold idea crossed his mind. He had mastered the art of the game in the US, but what if he tried a scam back home? The thought was tempting, but he wasn't naive. He knew one thing for sure. If he was going to pull this off in Kenya, he needed protection, political protection. Someone powerful enough to shield him if things ever went south. And just like that, he made his move. Without hesitation, he set his sights on Raila Odinga, the man widely favored to win the presidency. To get his attention, Don did something that left the entire nation talking. He gifted Raila a brand new Hummer, a luxury car that not only turned heads but also signaled that he was ready to play in the big leagues of Kenyan politics. But Don didn't stop there. He knew that one gift wasn't enough to solidify his position, so he went a step further and bankrolled a political outfit called Young Kenyans for Raila, a movement designed to rally Kenyans in the diaspora, ensuring he stayed on the good side of the political class. With money, power, and connections now on his side, Don Bosco was no longer just a rich young man. He was a player in a much bigger game. But as they say, when you dance too close to the fire, you are bound to get burned. And for Don, the flames were already creeping in. Don knew the game well. Money could open doors, but power could keep them open. That's why he made sure to secure his political connections early, hoping they would shield him if trouble ever came knocking. And trouble did come. In July 2007, the US government busted a Kenyan fraud ring that ran almost the same playbook as Don and his crew. The news hit like a thunderbolt, sending shockwaves through the underworld of scammers. Panic set in. Nobody knew who was next. The streets were hot and the authorities were watching. Don and his cronies had no choice but to disappear, lay low, keep quiet, and hope the storm passed. But in the world of crime, silence doesn't last forever, and for Don, the walls were slowly closing in. With the heat turned all the way up, Don and his crew knew they had to move carefully. The recent crackdown had exposed just how risky their game was. Filing fake tax returns in the US was no longer an option. The feds were watching, and one wrong move could land them behind bars. So for a while, there was little activity, just silence, hiding, waiting. But these weren't ordinary criminals. They weren't the type to sit still for too long. While staying under the radar, they cooked up a new plan, one even bolder than the last. If they couldn't steal from the US Treasury through tax refunds, they'd do it another way. This time, they would forge Treasury checks, fake government-issued payments that looked completely legitimate. And instead of chasing them in the US, where authorities were on high alert, they'd take them to a bank in Tanzania. A new scam, a new frontier, and if it worked, another fortune was waiting to be made. But in this game, every move came with a risk, and Don was about to find out just how dangerous it could get. The plan had to wait. The heat was too much, and Don knew better than to make a reckless move. So, as things cooled down, the US operations took a back seat. But a hustler never truly sleeps. With America becoming too risky, Don turned his eyes back home. What if he could pull off a business email compromise (BEC) scam right here in Kenya? If it worked, he could build a local ring, one that wouldn't attract the same kind of heat as the US. Like a fox, he moved carefully, picking his target in a bank. Smooth and calculated, Don approached the bank's manager. With his civil tongue and the promise of a clean deal, he pulled the man into the scheme. The goal? Divert 96 million Kenya shillings, money meant to pay a Chinese contractor, Garden Real Estate Development Limited, for construction work. But instead of reaching the rightful hands, the cash found its way into an account at EcoBank, not just any account, his sister's. It was a bold move, a test run. If this worked, Kenya was about to become his new playground. But big money always comes with big risks, and Don was about to learn just how unpredictable the game could be. Don knew one thing. If he wanted to survive in the game, he had to stay 2 steps ahead. The scam at Finabank had worked, but he couldn't afford too much attention, especially now that he had his eyes on something even bigger: politics. He was preparing for a political run in 2013, and that meant keeping his public image clean. To blend in, he started pouring money into sports, becoming a major sponsor of Shabana FC. His name was now tied to football, not fraud. A calculated move to earn the love of the people while keeping his real business in the shadows. But Don was never to sit idle. one to sit idle. Even as he played the role of a generous sports sponsor, he was quietly plotting his next big heist. He needed a new way to fleece the US Treasury, one that wouldn't raise immediate red flags. That's when Tanzania came into the picture. Through his growing network, Don met a lawyer named Median Mwale, a man who had the right connections to pull off something massive. Together, they hatched a plan. This time, it wasn't just tax refunds or small diversions. It was straight up fraud at an international bank. With the help of a corrupt manager at CRDB Bank Tanzania, Don and his new partners managed to cash fraudulent US Treasury checks worth a staggering $5 million. It was a heist on a whole new level, and for a moment, it seemed like Don had pulled off the perfect crime. But this game, no one stays untouchable forever. The walls were closing in, and Don was running out of places to hide. It was the perfect heist until it wasn't. The moment the money landed in their accounts, trouble followed. The US authorities had been watching, and it didn't take long before they tipped off the Tanzanian government about the fraudulent transactions. With no time, Don's accomplices were rounded up. The walls were caving in fast. But Don, he was in Kenya, safe, out of Tanzania's jurisdiction. By sheer luck, or maybe divine intervention, territorial boundaries became his shield. As his partners in crime faced the heat, he remained untouchable. For a while, it seemed like he had dodged the bullet. He was still rich, still connected, and still eyeing a seat in the 2013 elections. The political class had embraced him, and with money flowing, he was rubbing shoulders with the high and mighty. But power was a way of clouding judgment. Feeling invincible, Don made the worst decision of his life. A decision that will bring his empire crashing down. Blinded by loyalty or maybe ignorance, Don made the worst decision. He crossed the border into Tanzania. His mission: to visit his jailed partner, unaware that he was walking straight into the lion's den. The moment he set foot in Tanzania, the trap snapped shut. Authorities pounced, arresting him on the spot. Just like that, Don, once untouchable, once a millionaire playmaker, became a prisoner. Tanzania was no easy place to be locked up. For 5 long years, he called a cold cell home, as his wealth and influence faded into the distance. The fraud charges hung over his head like a death sentence. There was only one way out: to plead guilty. In the end, he struck a deal, accepting the charges and paying a hefty 15 million fine in exchange for his freedom. But even money wasn't enough to secure his release. Tanzanian President John Magufuli was unmoved, refusing to let him go despite desperate pleas from Shabana FC and his supporters. It took the intervention of Raila Odinga himself, his old political ally, to finally open the prison gates. After half a decade behind bars, Don walked free. But the world he had left behind, it will never be the same again. When Don finally walked out of prison, he didn't return like a broke man. He came back like a king. His homecoming was nothing short of a spectacle. Choppers roared above him, escorting him back to Kenyan soil as if he were a royalty. The streets were lined with people eager to witness the return of the man who had danced with danger and lied to tell the tale. But the most shocking part, he hadn't shriveled in prison like most inmates. No, Don had done the unthinkable. He had grown bigger. Like, who even gains weight behind bars? I'll tell you who. No one except Don. His welcome party was a grand affair, filled with the who's who of the political world. Among the notable guests was his brother-in-law, Oscar Sudi, and none other than Kalonzo Musyoka. Kalonzo's presence sparked outrage. Why was a respected politician celebrating the return of a man branded as a notorious money launderer? Critics tore into him, questioning his judgment. But for Don, none of that mattered. He was home, he was free, and he was back in the game. Or was he? Because in this world, second chances don't come easy. And for Don, the story was far from over. And that, my friend, is the unbelievable rise, fall, and comeback of Don Bosco Gichana, a man who played with fire and lived to tell the tale. From $1 million scams to a prison sentence that should have broken him, his story is nothing short of a movie. But the real question is, what happened next? Did he truly leave the game, or was his return just the beginning of another chapter? Stay tuned, because there is always more to the story. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on our next deep dive. And hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep watching.